Hello all, I am greeting you from my floor. I have a very special guest. You want to say hello? Oh, what a charmer you are. That is Moya. She's not my child, but she's my roommate's daughter. And her name is Moya, and she's named after a sentient spacecraft from a show called Farscape. I've never seen it, but my roommate's a bit of a nerd in his own right. So she will be sitting with me temporarily. I don't know. Oh, she's moving a little bit. She's on the move. But I wanted to pop on and talk about some books that some books that I would recommend for the Disability Readathon coming up in April, which is in a few days, but also my own personal TBR for the Disability Readathon. Quick little fact, I actually got my I was going to school for my master's and I kind of paused on that, but I got my bachelor's degree in special education. So anything that intersects with disability, but also just education in general, or like educating the public, those two things on their own, but especially together, are like my bread and butter. I love it. So I'm really excited to participate in April on the readathon, but also to give you some good recommendations. Now, I will preface this by saying a lot of these books I first heard about, or primarily heard about the most and the loudest, from Jen Campbell. So I'll link her down below, but I'm sure most of you know who she is. She's a booktube darling, of course. And you know, one of her books is on this list, but I just wanted to preface that by saying that like some of these were not originally recommended by me, and you probably already heard about them on her channel. But the first recommendation I have for you is actually the first two. One was an audiobook, and that was A Mind Spread Out on the Ground. Sorry, I had to look at my list to make sure I wasn't forgetting anything. A Mind Spread Out on the Ground by Alicia Elliot. Alicia Elliot is a Haudenosaunee woman living in Canada. She grew up there. And this was like, I would compare it, like I would say it was in essays, but it was like very closely linked to her family. She does have information about indigenous tribes and how they're treated, and how colonialism and the erasure that colonialism creates causes a lot of generational trauma. And I thought this collection was so beautifully done. The prose is like stunning in parts, and really poignant, and she's a brilliant writer. The connections she makes are so incredible, and there's quite a bit about language. The Mohawk, I think it's a Mohawk word for depression, is a mind spread out on the ground. And there are similar different terms that are for depression within different tribes. And I just thought her discussions on mental health were so gripping and poignant and personal. She talks about sexual assault, so like trigger warning for that kind of thing. And she just talks about growing up in Canada in impoverished situation with her parents. Her dad was a Haudenosaunee man, and her mom was a white, I believe, Catholic woman. And her mom had mental health issues that were, you know, she was in and out of different clinics for most of Alicia's like childhood and growing up, and so her dad had primary custody, and just the conflict between having a white mother and so not totally fitting in with, you know, her dad's family and his tribe and his like culture, but also not being fully white. And so she was kind of mixed race and in between in terms of cultures and race. And I thought it was great. So I would definitely recommend picking that up. It's very informative, but it's not in such a way that it's like super academic. So I think it's very accessible for anyone. My next recommendation, I would say, is in a very similar vein, and that's Sitting Pretty by Rebecca Tausig. I read this, the other one I listened to as an audiobook, but I read this in a physical form, but I returned it already to the library. But this, if it's by Rebecca Tausig, I think I said that, but maybe not. This book was so brilliant. It was so funny. It was so heart-wrenching and heartwarming, and it was so informative. Rebecca Tausig is primarily wheelchair-bound. She was really, really sick as a child, and it caused different issues in terms of mobility. And I don't want to go into it because she goes into it in her book, but it just talks about what it was like growing up disabled and in a wheelchair, and especially in her family where I think she's one of 6, and so it was very much like she still had to kind of fend for herself. And in her family there was, yes, she was different in that she couldn't walk, but she would like drag herself around and like lift herself up, and like kind of was very much treated the same as her siblings, and how liberating that was, even though it obviously was challenging. And it goes into like finding housing when you are disabled, especially if it's in terms of like accessibility, trying to get through doorways and upstairs and all of that, and the access, but also the availability of those kinds of houses, and like the registry, and trying to get like on different registries for houses like that, especially if you need like financial assistance. And it was just great. It was such a good book. And again, I couldn't recommend it more highly. Again, also from Jen, she also recommended Mine Spread Out on the Ground. And then the next one that I'll recommend is The Beginning of the World in the Middle of the Night by Jen Campbell. This is a short story collection. It's magical realism. It's so playful, but so it really gets to you. It really cuts the heart. Obviously, a lot of these kind of riff on fairy tales because that's kind of her jam, and she is so good at it. But there is like disability, disfigurement representation in here, and obviously Jen Campbell is kind of an expert in her own right personally, but also has done a lot of research within that field. And so I just think this book is brilliant, and I have quite a few tabs in there. So if you're looking for a fiction recommendation that's like short stories, this is definitely one to go to. Next up, I have... these are all ones that I've like dipped into, actually read myself. The first one, I'm going to recommend, continuing on ones that I've already read, is a poetry collection. This is the Virginia State Colony for Epileptics and FeebleMinded by Molly McCully Brown. This I actually recommended to Jen, and she purchased it quite a while back. I don't know if she's read it, but this book blew me away. Also, I don't know if you can see, but so many tabs in this. Molly McCully Brown grew up she has cerebral palsy, and she grew up wheelchair bound, and I think I'm remembering that right. She is currently like in a wheelchair, and also grew up, slowly losing the ability to walk. And she grew up very close to what once was the Virginia State Colony for Epileptics and FeebleMinded. And it had only shut down like within 20 years of her being born. I think it may have even been less than that. And so this whole collection is her kind of rumination on like if she had been born a little bit earlier, she would have very likely ended up in this situation. And so the whole collection is broken up, and it's perspectives of potential, like what it would have been like to be living in here. She kind of delves into, she does put on different personas. Like she will imagine what it would be like if you were blind, or if you had an intellectual disability, or if you had cerebral palsy, if you were mute or deaf, she also goes into, it would have been run by like nurses and sometimes nuns and doctors, and she kind of also tries to inhabit their headspace and like what it was like for them to work in these places and how they would have perceived the people living in them. And I think this collection is so brilliant. I've never heard anyone else talk about it except for when Jen hauled it. But this is definitely an incredible collection in its own right, but for sure for Disability Rap, I think it's great. And I will try to find, she did an interview with Terry Gross a number of years ago, which is how I heard about this. So I will try to link that down below. But this is great. And in that same vein, because I heard about her, I'm going to like mention another one coming up. But I wasn't able to find a copy, but there is a joint poetry collection that she put out in 2021 with another woman. Sorry, I'm looking at my list. Named, where is it? It's called In the Field Between Us, Poems by Molly McCully Brown and Susanna Nevison, and that's another collection of poetry. It's a collaborative effort, so I don't know exactly how it's broken up. I don't know if they worked on the poems together or if some of them were Molly's and some of them were Susanna's, but I'm really keen to pick that up if I can find a copy of it. I may order it from the bookstore, but I just wanted to go ahead and make this video before, just in case I don't. But I would also have that on your radar. Maya, don't eat that plant. The next one is kind of more of a general, like, just trying to, like, open your eyes to, like, other kinds of trauma. I mean, one that we talk about a lot, but I don't know if we read as much about it, and that is PTSD and that kind of things that happen when people come back from war. War is one of those things that I wish there was none of, and I actually don't think that most of the conflicts that we cause as colonial powers, all of them are really avoidable, and it's really upsetting. But I think, especially if you are someone who's very against war, it's very easy to kind of like throw out the baby with the bathwater and kind of forget about the people who are serving, because some of them are serving because in terms of like options after school, it was like the best option, or, you know, any number of reasons that they go into the military. Moya? She's getting dangerously close to eating this Montera plant, which is not great. But I have this collection because I actually have a friend of mine who wrote some poems in here. It may just be one. It's been a while since I read it. But I think collections like this do a really good job of kind of rounding out experiences in war. Obviously, there are quite a few trigger warnings in here for violence and PTSD. There are perhaps, I haven't read the whole collection, so I couldn't tell you, instances of sexual assault, especially if there are female voices in here, which I hope there are. I didn't really look into it too much, but This is the Deadly Writers Patrol, and it's just the spring 2018 edition. But I would just look into, this is kind of more of a umbrella, like maybe look into rep in terms of like trauma and mental illness from this perspective as well to round out your experiences. Okay, all the others are ones that are my personal TBR that I'm hoping to get into, and this is already 15 minutes long, so hopefully I'll go through them roughly pretty quickly. This is Tea Dragon Society. This one is more like, I bought it about a month ago and I have been wanting to read it, but it has, I don't believe to my knowledge that Katie O'Neill is, it may actually be Kay O'Neill. I think it's Kay O'Neill now. I don't believe that Kay O'Neill, that they are a wheelchair user, but there is a character in here who uses a wheelchair. Let me see if I can find a spread right here. So there, obviously the illustrations are beautiful, but there is like disability rep in here. There's also a lot of queer rep in here. So this is one that I'm hoping will be like a little lighter and kind of round out my reading and be like a lovely kind of addition to my reading for the month. The next one I have is another recommendation from Jen Campbell, and this is The Faster I Walk, the Smaller I Am by Kjersti A. Skomsvold. I actually pulled up a video of this author talking about her collection, and obviously I couldn't, it was in her native language, so I couldn't understand anything, but I tried to get her name as close as I could. And it's as close as I will ever come to saying her name, but it's Kjersti A. Skomsvold. And this was a novel that I heard about from Jen Campbell, and I wanted to pick it up, like, when I first heard her recommend it, like, a few years ago, I think. But I never got around to it, and so this is the perfect time, because Kjersti herself has either some kind of disability. I don't know if it's mental illness or a physical disability, but I'm very excited about this. So this will be definitely on my TBR. And next is a book that I think has been getting a lot of buzz, and that's A Room Called Earth by Madeline Ryan. This book I actually ordered 3 of, and I sent 2 of them to 2 of my best friends in part of a care package. So hopefully we will be doing some kind of read-along this month with this book. But I am so excited. It's by a neurodiverse author, and it takes place I didn't really tell you much about The Faster I Walk, but that's because I really don't know much about it, and I kind of want to go into it blind. But this book, I know, takes place over the course of, like, I believe just one night, and it's kind of in the head of this woman who is on the ASD spectrum or neurodiverse, and she is just kind of at a party, and we kind of get her perspective and get a glimpse of, like, the different conversations that she has with people, and kind of calling people out on, like, the things that we say in social situations or do that we in social situations because we're supposed to. And so I am thrilled to get to this. Next up we have another poetry collection. This is Deaf Republic by Ilya Kaminsky, and I am really excited to get into this. My specialty in Deaf Ed was Deaf Studies. That's like the particular concentration that I went into. So I'm really excited. Ilya was born in the former Soviet Union and then moved to the U.S. as, I believe, like as a child. And this is kind of a play in prose, from what I understand from when I, like, picked it up earlier. when I pre-ordered it, when it first came out, and then I've saved it. I just like was too scared to go into it, but I just knew I was gonna love it, but I like was you know, you just know when you really want to read a book, but you also want to save it. So that's kind of what I was doing. But I am excited to get around to it for the readathon. And it's kind of a play in prose that takes place in like the Soviet Union, but has to do with deafness. I think, yeah, just kind of like townspeople there. And I'm really excited about this. So that's my poetry recommendation, along with the other Molly McCully Brown collection. And then this is another Molly McCully TBR edition. I was going to say recommendation, but I haven't read it yet, so I can't really fully recommend it. But this is Places I've Taken My Body, essays, and I'm so excited. This is obviously a nonfiction, so I'm thrilled to kind of get a more like in-depth kind of the other collection that I read from her was obviously kind of experimental and kind of like what it would be like if she had been in the institution, and so this is obviously going to be more personal to her own life. So I'm thrilled to get to this. I don't really know what it's going to entail, just kind of growing up, being disabled, and like her life now. So I'm hoping for something that's kind of in like not a similar vein, but like in terms of like a mix between facts about her condition and how people treat her, and also like a personal kind of take on it. So I'm really excited to get to this. This is an anthology, Disability Visibility, which I think we've all seen. It's been floating around everywhere on BookTube. And it's an anthology about different people who have different disabilities and their experiences. So I'm thrilled to get to this. And then Gollum Girl. This is a very hefty book. I think there are actually, yeah, there are like photos in here. Photos and artwork, because Riva Lehrher is an artist, and she like photographs and like does, I think, art like on top of photos in some cases based on the picture. Yeah, so she's a painter. So that's some of her work, but she is an artist, and this is her memoir growing up with, I know I wrote it down, she has spina bifida, which is something that I like am aware of, but I don't have a ton of experience. None of the kids that I've worked with have had spina bifida, and so I only know vaguely kind of how it affects like your general daily life in a very vague way. But I'm really excited to get to this so that I can have a better understanding and kind of dive into her work a little bit too. That would be really fun. So this is Gollum Girl by Riva Lehrher. It's a memoir. It's obviously hard because it's a library copy to see, but it's a really beautiful cover. I would imagine she probably did the art. Let's see. Jacket art. Yes, she did. So this is my next rep. And then last but not least, let me make sure there's nothing. Oh, I also am going to, Hoopla Audio has an audiobook for care work, which is a nonfiction all about, it's primarily features like, it's written by one woman, but it's like focused on how queer community and people of color are very heavy into care work, and how, from what I understand, I haven't read it yet, but how they kind of do the brunt of the activism, as we know, for anything really, and kind of the issues with the system of care that we have. I may also pick up, I have it, my legs are asleep and I can't get up, but I have a book called something about care work. It's put out by Verso, and it's in the same cover as this, like in the same group, but it's also all about like caring for other. It's called the Care Manifesto. Now I'm remembering that, and I will link it down below. And that is specifically, I think, more about like just general caring for people, and especially when we're in a pandemic kind of thing. But that would be also probably a good recommendation that goes kind of along with the book Care Work. And then finally we have Red Rosa, which is a graphic biography of Rosa Luxemburg by Kate Evans. This is also a Verso publication book, and this is a graphic biography. Red Rosa. Rosa Luxemburg was, as probably most of you know, was a huge member of the workers' union rights movement. I'm trying to think of what exactly the movement was called, but basically like from, I mean, was it communism? I feel really dumb. I think it was technically communism. Socialist thought. Okay, I thought she was a socialist, but I didn't want to say that before I was sure. But basically, you know, workers' rights, and she also had a visible disability. She had a limp from very young, and so she was obviously, especially back in her time, in the earliest 20th century, I cheat and look, was very frowned upon, and so that ties in a lot with her anti-colonist and anti-capitalist views in terms of like, you know, if you aren't productive and can't fully work, especially if you're a woman, then how are you any good? And so I'm excited. I haven't read much about Rosa Luxemburg, as you can tell. Something just fell in the other room. But I'm excited to pick this up. So, those are all the books. This was a very rough take, but I also still don't know how to do any editing. And my roommate is out, and he will probably not be out for quite a long time. So this is my only take. This is what I'm going to publish. I hope you've enjoyed Moya. She's sitting over here. I'll give you one last. I don't know if you can see her, but that's her. And then also, look at this tiny growth on my monstera plant. I just got this last weekend, and I'm thrilled that it's growing. And then it has another little sprout that's coming. If you can see that, you can't really see it very well, but that's about to unfurl. So that's it from me. Let me know down below in the comments if you are participating in Disability Readathon, and if so, what books you are reading. And I hope to chat to you below in the comments. Bye!